Welcome everyone to the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Executive Committee meeting of Friday, August 22nd. This meeting is being conducted in accordance with the California Executive Order N2920 in consideration of the coronavirus. All members of Silicon Valley Clean Energy Executive Committee and staff will be participating in this meeting by teleconference. The members of the public may observe this meeting electronically by accessing the meeting via instructions above. The public comments can be sent in advance, and I will allow public comment at the beginning of the meeting. And I think that's all I basically need to say. And may we call the meeting to order and have a roll call, Dorothy, please.
Yes. Chair Gibbons.
Here.
Members Tyson.
Here.
Abby Koga.
Here.
Elahi.
Here.
And Flygore.
Here.
All members are present, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And the next is an opportunity for the public to comment on matters not on our agenda. And then we will also take comments on items that are on the agenda. Do we have anyone wishing to speak from the public? I see we have 4 attendees, but I see no hands raised. If there are no people wishing to speak at this time, either as agendized or non-agendized, we will close that portion of public comment. And if you would scroll to the next page of the agenda. Okay, and we have a consent calendar item, which is approval of the minutes from the June 25th, 2021 Executive Committee meeting. If there are any comments, or the chair will consider a motion.
Tyson moves acceptance. Second.
Go ahead, Javed.
Okay, we have a motion by Director Tyson, second by Director Elahi. May we have a roll call vote, please?
Yes. Chair Gibbons.
Yes.
Members Tyson.
Yes.
Abby Koga.
Aye.
Elahi.
Aye.
Flygore.
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. And we will move to the regular calendar items, the beginning with the CEO update. And this is a discussion item.
Thank you, Chair Gibbons. So I have a few updates. The California Community Choice Financing Authority Board met yesterday.
Garish, excuse me, can you speak a little bit closer to your mic or a little louder?
Yeah. How's this sound? Does it sound okay?
Sure.
Yeah, okay, I just need to raise my voice a little bit. So thank you, Chair Gibbons. So the California Community Choice Financing Authority met yesterday and approved issuing $1.25 billion worth of bonds for EBCE and SVCE. The marketing of those bonds will be based on the timing determined by the underwriters. It could be as early as next week. We will keep you updated on the sale of the bonds. And then, of course, once everything's done, we'll bring kind of a closing kind of document to the Finance Committee in December, as per the request made by the board at the last meeting. I wanted to also update you on hiring. We have had some success in hiring. So we have actually got 2 offers out where people have accepted in the power supply group.
Oh, good.
One is expected to join September 27th. Another will join the end of, end of September. So beginning of September and end of September. Third offer, again in the power supply group, should be going out next week. We're in the final stages of negotiation. But that person's request is to start in the first week of December due to issues that they have with their current employer. We've also made an offer to another person in Don Bray's group. And so essentially 4 offers would be, out. And so that 4th offer, I think next Friday is the deadline for that person to accept. So that feels good to actually have some offers going out and some people accepting and final stages of negotiation. And then we continue. There are several other open positions that we'll continue to work on. But I thought you would be interested in hearing about some of that progress. Due to the Delta variant, we are looking at a hybrid work kind of coming back only a little later, but we are going to follow the county's vaccination policies. So next week, we'll be sending a memo out to all employees about mandatory vaccinations required. And when you come into the office, you're going to need a mask and things like that. I was thinking of doing a kind of social event in October, but I'm postponing that now to December. So this is still in a place of flux. And as far as board meetings, we'll talk about it very shortly. In our next presentation, as part of the CEO report, I'm going to have Benna Chang give you an update on both federal legislation and also an update on what we've heard on some of our Brown Act flexibility.
Yeah, exactly.
Subsequent to Benna's presentation, Melissa Charles, Director of Regulatory and Legislative Affairs, will be providing you an update on some regulatory changes since the last board meeting, actually. So Benna, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Executive Committee members. Lisa, could I get the slide up? Or I'm not really sure who's putting the PowerPoint together. So as Girish mentioned, just wanted to give everybody a quick update on the overall infrastructure package that's been moving in DC. So as you all know, this is really coming in 2 different parts. One is a bipartisan infrastructure package that has both Democrat and Republican support. And the other piece is a reconciliation package, which is a Democrat-led only bill, and they only need Democratic votes to pass that. So as you all know, the bipartisan infrastructure package did pass out of the Senate a couple of weeks ago. This is really a historic once-in-a-lifetime package, and it contains $550 billion in new funds out of a $1.2 trillion overall package. And a lot of what we would consider traditional infrastructure projects were included in that. So that included roads, bridges, and then a whole host of really exciting clean energy programs. Now, some of you might have seen this chart before, but here's really just a snapshot of some of the clean energy investments inside the package. There are many more than what's listed here, but we picked out some highlights to show you all today. The first one on the list is really money that our member agencies will receive directly. These are energy efficiency and conservation block grants. This was something that was part of the stimulus package back in 2007, where local governments got a dedicated source of funding from the federal government for energy efficiency and conservation projects. It's really exciting. The next group of projects on this list with an asterisk are really programs that SVCE is looking at very closely to see if we can access some of this money directly. So you'll see there's an R&D program around electric grid reliability. This is a new program that's being started by this infrastructure package. There's a smart grid investment matching grant program, which is an existing program. Very importantly, there's a huge infusion of funding for charging infrastructure of $7.5 billion. And there are opportunities for organizations like SVCE to access some of this money and also work in partnership with others to apply for funding. Finally, there's cost-effective codes implementation funding as well in the package. And then finally, there's 2 categories I just want to call out that there are things in this larger package that might not come directly to SVCE, but go to support things that are very important to the clean energy ecosystem. So this includes additional funding for transmission lines, as well as career skills training for energy efficient design and operations. So just wanted to spend a few moments really quickly talking about the next steps. I think the very bottom line is that none of this is a done deal yet. There's a lot of delicate negotiations that still need to happen within Congress to get both of these packages passed. So as I mentioned, the second reconciliation package is something that the Democrats are working on currently, and it couldn't contain a very ambitious set of additional infrastructure investments. And the president's really been talking about both human infrastructure, so things like extending the child care tax credit, as well as additional climate change investments. So some things that we are particularly interested in include investment tax credits for clean energy projects, a clean electricity payment plan, and then additional EV purchase incentives that weren't addressed in the bipartisan package. As I mentioned, this is going to be a delicate dance. There's a strong push from progressives in Congress that they want to see both the reconciliation package and the bipartisan package passed together. And the speaker has struck a deal with moderates to commit to passing the bipartisan bill by September 27. So sometime this fall, we expect both of these packages to move. We know that although this is still in flux, there's really strong commitment from the president and from Democratic leadership to get something done. So there's a lot of progress and momentum here. Maybe I'll stop here and see if there's any questions on this.
Director Elahi, and then Director Flygore.
Thank you. Yeah, we're really happy you got 4 offers out for different employees, and given the size of this, the funds that may be available, have you reviewed your personnel inventory to see if you have the expertise that would help us apply for these grants and these funds, or whether you need additional staffing for that? Is that, I don't know, because that may not have been part of the original equation when you're looking for what kind of people you need to hire. But this is a different ballgame in a way. It's like, making sure to get the grants and the funds. And there's a lot of money out there, so.
Yeah, great question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Great question. We have that on our radar screen, but we haven't actually designated any position here. Melissa and Benna are working with the Cal CCA community to see if we can get some federal lobbying resources to designate CCAs as a source, as a recipient of these funds. A lot of these funds are going to be coming to cities and counties directly. So I think on our side, we do have some time to get the funds. I think more of the resources, Javed, is going to be on how the funds get utilized. And we'll talk about it in the next item, which is the strategic planning focus areas. I think the board was clear at the last meeting that we need to almost like double down on our efforts for programs and decarbonization. So we are looking at that, and we'll talk about it in more detail at the next item.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying, and the cities and counties will probably need some help. So given there's a good chunk that's going to be for climate related activity, I'm just tossing it out. I'm sure you guys have considered it, but it may need more. It may be somebody you need to hire sooner rather than later. Lobbying is one thing, but in-house grant writing and making sure you dot all the I's and cross all the T's would be helpful. Thank you, Girish.
Director Flygore.
Thank you, and congratulations, Girish, on those 4 offers. Happy to hear that. My question actually related to lobbying. So you partially answered my question where we're obviously working on a collaborative lobbying effort. But do you think it's worth, this could be for Ben now, if we do some local efforts? So for example, there are clearly things in the current version of the package that would benefit us. Do you think it would help if SVCE sends a letter to our local congressional representatives saying, this, we don't care what gets taken out. These are the items that are core to what we do and to your communities. And then maybe even ask our cities to send supporting letters as well on those specific things.
Yes, that's a great question. So just to clarify, the bipartisan infrastructure package that I showed is the speaker has committed to not changing that. So what is in it for now. But I think the action is really about this broader $3.5 trillion reconciliation package. And to your point, earlier this year, SVCE and 5 other CCAs sent a joint letter to all of our collective congressional delegation members, including our 2 senators, about lots of our priorities. So investment tax credits, for example. We talked about how it's really important to spend limited federal funding in the hardest to reach communities. So when you think about electric vehicle charging infrastructure or building electrification, and it's really heartening to see that many of those ideas have been already incorporated into the bipartisan package. And since that meeting, or since that letter, we've also seen our congressional delegation join sign-on letters that talk about those specific items. So I think a lot of good progress and a lot of great support from our delegation members. But I think we might have sent out the letter to the entire board a few weeks ago. Maybe it's something that we resend out again. And I would love to chat about how cities could help amplify that message. I think that would be really exciting. So thank you for that offer.
I would mention that the National League of Cities sends out almost daily updates on this type of thing and offers opportunities for sending in letters and of support. So if some of you don't receive that, I think 3 morning letters from that group, do let me know and I'm happy to forward them on. But they do help differentiate and answer kind of what you were just talking about, Director Fligor. What is it that we really want to focus on and need? Thank you. Benna, I think you have some more to say.
Yes, so moving on just for a quick update on the Brown Act bills. So as you guys have heard us talk about, we're really following 2 main bills related to the Brown Act. The most promising of the 2 is actually AB 361 by Rivas. And if you'll remember, this bill would allow us to continue to operate under the pandemic rules for teleconferencing board meetings, as long as there's a proclaimed state of emergency. So a lot of the additional flexibility that the governor's executive order gave us in terms of having remote meetings and not having to post the agenda, for example, at each remote meeting location would still apply. So I have some good news on that particular bill. We heard from our lobbyists this week that the bill is about to take some amendments to add an urgency clause. So basically, as soon as the governor signs the bill will go into effect versus waiting until January 1st of next year, like a normal bill would. So that would resolve some of the issues we have with this gap, because I think our authority runs out in September. And then originally we're thinking we wouldn't get new authority till January, but as soon as the governor signs the bill, we would have that authority. So that is really great. And the other amendment that the bill will take, it's not yet in print, is that it will incorporate some of the aspects of AB 339 by Assemblymember Lee, which is the other bill that we were watching. If you remember, this bill directs only for large jurisdictions that they allow teleconferencing abilities for the public to join meetings. So I have not yet seen the language, but my assumption is that they would take the public teleconferencing authority and put it into AB 361 as well. So the good news is both bills have been moving very well. Both are on the assembly floor, which is really the last stop before it goes to the governor's desk for the most part. So we're watching these very carefully, and we'll keep the executive committee and the board updated on its progress. Happy to take any questions.
Yeah. If I may, I think just as a heads up to everybody, every city issues their own emergency proclamation. And it will be important to make sure that you are aware of all of our member cities and what they are doing with this. Right now, ours runs out, I think it's September 15th. And we're desperately waiting to get clarity from the governor. But we would, for speaking for Campbell, I doubt that we would move forward with an emergency declaration without it being statewide. So.
And just to that point, I did look it up today. There's no expiration date that I saw for the governor's state emergency declaration. I know that he has rolled back a couple of the executive orders that are tied to that original declaration, but my understanding is that the overall state of emergency still applies. And maybe you have different information. That would be great too.
No, obviously now I'm going to check because that's not what my understanding was, but that's helpful. Thank you. And Director Abikoga.
Thank you. I was hoping you could help me with some dates. There's something that expires September 30th. I think that is tied to our being able to do Zoom meetings until then. And then when is last day of the legislature? Is it the 10th? Or that Friday? Yeah.
Right. So great question. The last day for any bills to pass out of the legislature is September 10th. That's correct. And then the governor usually has 30 days until October 10th to sign or veto any bills.
Okay, great. I've heard, well, I'm sure everyone's heard this, that the governor's not going to do anything until after September 14th. So that looks like timing wise, it might all align. Great. Thank you.
Okay, anything else, Benna? Okay, all right. If there are no additional questions, thank you. We appreciate these updates very much, so thank you. All right, and Girish, you have anything else to add to your executive report?
Yes, we'll now have Melissa Charles provide us an update on some regulatory
There you are.
things happening at the PUC.
Yes, things continue to be very, very active when it comes to reliability. So in the last board meeting, I had talked about the governor's proclamation at the end of July, which basically called for increased capacity as it relates to reliability and grid reliability. In response, the CPC issued a staff concept paper a couple of weeks ago, which basically has proposals in terms of increasing supply and decreasing demand. And so when it comes to increasing supply, some of the proposals are new penalties, higher penalties, accelerating procurement. When it comes to decreasing demand, their new emergency load reduction program, which is a demand response program, they have some changes that they propose there in terms of increasing incentives to get customers to reduce their demand. Comments are due next week. We're working with CalCCA on comments and testimony there. I wanted to flag it for you because reliability is top of mind, and this concept paper is additional to the 11.5 gigawatt mandate that was passed earlier this year. It's also additional to the resource adequacy program reform rules, which are currently under consideration and being worked out. So there's a lot of layered and overlapping policies that are being developed and new mandates that have been imposed on us. So we are in the process of both advocating and working with CalCCA on advocacy, but we are also working to understand what our new procurement and compliance requirements are. I'll stop there and see if there are any questions.
I don't see any, Militia. Okay. I would just offer, does everyone get the CPUC newsletter from our local area fellow, John? Okay, because that was helpful. I read it and it gave me some previews of some of the things that are going on. It's quite dynamic, to say the least. Director Tyson?
Oh, I just want to say I've had several interactions with our representative and he is remarkably responsive. So if you have any questions, I find he is really on it.
Oh, that's great. Okay. All right, thank you. And Girish?
I'm done with the CEO report. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. All right. Then we will then move on to item number 3, which is the strategic focus areas and the strategic plan update. This is also a discussion item.
Yep.
And who will be presenting this?
Yours truly, and we'll have a presentation coming up here. So I'm hoping that all these slides are going to be old hat to the executive committee And you're going to say, that's enough already. Let's just move on. Because we've been talking about this. So let's go to slide 2. So one of the things I want to continuously frame is, why are we here and why are we around? And, emission reduction is a big deal for us. And this is what the state emission reduction trajectory looks like. Next slide. And this is a similar slide, but getting it down to SVCE's service territory. And the bars are broken up further into where the emissions are coming from. The top part of each bar are the emissions from transportation. The orange are emissions from natural gas. And the bottom teal line are electricity emissions. You can see that electricity emissions have reduced dramatically due to SVCE. But the big pieces are going to be in transportation and buildings. So over the last 4 years, we have reduced emissions tremendously. At the last board meeting, there was, and Bruce is on the participant list here, but there was a comment made that our emissions inventory may be delayed. So I wanted to clarify that it isn't. We actually presented this chart to the board at the June meeting. So this is not delayed. So you've already seen this. And it basically shows that we are kind of ahead of the game, but that's because of COVID. With COVID, we've had a lot of transportation reduction. The big changes are yet to come, and that's going to be very challenging for us to achieve. But that's kind of what we'll talk about in terms of our strategy, where we're going to be adding resources. The delay that Bruce talked about is more on forecasting emissions. So that was part of our work plan on how we forecast GHG emission reductions. That is not a trivial task. And due to staffing shortages, we moved that. And this was prior to Amy leaving. We moved that to the end of the year. And now with Amy leaving, this may be pushed out a little bit more. But that's a forecast that's not going to change some of the things we're going to do on programs that I'll talk about. Sorry, I should have told next slide. Sorry, go to the next slide. Sorry, this is the slide I was talking to. I'm sorry, exec committee. So I'll just say that these are the emission reductions that we have at SVCE. And so this is all looking backward. And this is what was presented to you in June. And what I was saying is the forecasting of emissions is a lot more complicated than looking back to see what was actually accomplished. All right, next slide. So this slide we've provided to you before when we talked about our strategic plan, but I wanted to just make note in blue, a couple of additional things just in the last few months that we did not highlight for you back in the May-June timeframe. And so some of these external shifts, one is, this is national and global, the IPCC Code Red Report is something that the board has taken very seriously, staff has taken very seriously. On the CPUC, CEC, and CAISO side, we have an additional up to 5,000 megawatts statewide of emergency procurement for 2022 and 23. And lastly, on the CCA side, there are additional opportunities for savings through CCCFA and other shared services. So that's an area where there's an opportunity both to kind of mitigate risk on the staff side, but also lower costs or economies of scale. So that's kind of looking at the horizon. And if you can go to the next slide, it's a timeline of both strategic plan updates, detailed work plan, and the CEO evaluation. So, and that combined with the budget, right? So they all kind of work together. And so here we are just before going into the September board meeting. And the Finance Committee, Executive Committee, and Board have taken a look at the budget. And at the last board meeting, you provided us support and feedback. So we will be bringing the budget to you at the next meeting on September 8th. I'd also like to get strategic focus areas approved there. We are in the middle of the CEO evaluation and setting CEO priorities, so that'll also be in the closed session at the September meeting. Next. So to summarize, there were no changes to the mission or the measure. The board supported keeping this the same. Next. There was also strong support for the 5 focus areas to adapt to industry change. And you've already provided me direction and support for additional staffing to maintain capacity. And these are the additional items that are reflected in the budget too. And you've seen this before, so I'm not really going to spend time on it. And I'll be open for questions, of course, after my presentation. Next slide. So over here, the new bullet is the last one. And I'd say instead of, it's reviewing the deployment of decarbonization programs. And internally, we are talking about it in terms of a doubling down strategy. What is the doubling down strategy to respond to where we are right now? The IPCC Code Red report. So that's an additional input that will be incorporated into our work plan. Last slide, next slide, I mean. So in terms of, on the left-hand side is what we have communicated to the board regarding the budget, strategic focus area, and strategic plan so far. At the August 11th board meeting, the board supported the increasing funding and policy changes for staff resources, updated the reserve policy to strengthen finances and provide for the rainy day fund, and to maintain a 1% rate discount and revisit that at the end of 2021. So all this is reflected in the budget that you'll see on September 8th. I think and then there was additional discussion, the main being on increased and accelerated program deployment. So at the September 8th board meeting, what I'm thinking of doing is presenting essentially, along with the budget, the strategic focus areas for approval. And I would suggest I think the board has expressed quite a bit of interest on accelerated program deployment, so we'll add that. As far as the detailed work plan update with all the 20 goals and next to 70 measures, I plan to bring that to the board only in October. It takes quite a bit of time to get all that done, and given our staffing, all the directors have to do it. I thought we'll move that piece to October, and I think the board has provided us significant input on the actual strategic focus areas that I hope will be sufficient to get approved at the September board meeting along with the budget. So that is my last slide, and be happy to take questions from the board.
Director Tyson.
This is going to come a little bit out of left field, but I've seen a lot of these charts over the last couple of years or so. And what they show us is compared to whatever our baseline is, we've had this reduction that's relatively modest up through about last year, and then maybe a little better for the pandemic, and then a sharp one to a lower number by 2030 or 2045. And that, of course, is the big challenge to say, how do we get there? And that's maybe the code red you're talking about. I saw a presentation or a paper, and it was a call to action. And I wish I could tell you the source of it, but it was a little less than a month ago that said, we can get to a negative carbon footprint by some year, like 2040. And so then I looked at the details, And I thought, how are they solving the massive thing that we can't do? And then it had a big chunk of carbon sequestration of some sort that was never discussed in this paper written by academics. And of course, I'm very suspicious of academics, you know, as how we, and so I don't even know how to word my question, but it is to say, once people start counting carbon sequestration, which could be, you know, inserting it into abandoned, you know, structures or other things, then it changes the whole calculus. And it sounds a little bit like cheating to say, we're not going to necessarily reduce our footprint. We're just going to put the carbon someplace else and maybe leave it for some other generation to solve. And I just wonder, do we have trouble explaining what we're going to do in that context when other people are raising things that sort of change the base rules? I don't even know exactly what my question is, but give it a try, Girish.
So yeah, some of these global kind of issues and these trajectories that people are talking about, whether it's sequestration is one way of getting there, large-scale nuclear is another way of getting there. You know, to me, there's a certain piece of it, I think similar to you, what you were alluding to. At some point, I stopped understanding what's going on there. I don't get it. And so I have to change my focus to what can we as an agency do? What's in our sphere of control? And there are all these worries and opportunities out there. So it's a combination of keeping our eye on that horizon, that 2040, 2050 horizon, and then reflecting our community's interests and our financial state to see what can we actually do. So this is where, so sorry, I'm kind of changing your question into a different focus point of kind of where do we want to double down? I'm puzzled too when it comes to things like carbon sequestration. The technologies aren't there at this point. And yeah, so to me, it's kind of like, okay, great. When you kind of, and we're too small to actually fund some of those technologies. That's got to come from the federal government. Big money has to come from the feds or the state. It's not us.
Well, that's a better answer than my question. And so I appreciate just a little bit of dialogue.
Director Elahi.
Thank you. Yeah, Vice Chair Tyson's question actually made me think a little bit. I mean, there was a marathon last week to fund our heroes, the doctors and the nurses, the Bloom Energy called Spirit and some marathon. And that got, so I didn't really understand what Bloom Energy is all about. Maybe Grish can help with that. And what Vice Chair Tyson was talking about is basically carbon capture. And it's some way of doing carbon capture, which I understand is pretty expensive, reading Bill Gates' book that you kind of sent us. But that may be something if that could be put into the grant funding that's coming out of these infrastructure bills. If we're going to be looking at that as one way of asking for money to do something in that area, because ultimately somebody's going to have to do carbon capture. And yeah, we're too small to do it, but I don't think that all these things that we're doing to reduce carbon is going to help us, because the things that we create, the carbon that's being generated, it's going up every year because we're creating more steel and more cement and more roads and everything else. So at some point that's got to be looked at. So first, do you know anything about Bloom Energy, what they do? I mean, they've been around for a while in Silicon Valley.
So two things. Bloom Energy has essentially a fuel cell, and so they provide electricity using natural gas, converting that to electricity. So that's something, it's a technology that we don't really support because it's base load natural gas. And so it is pitched to companies and data center companies as a way of having like clean fuel. It's not something that we support. And actually there are cities that there are actually some lawsuits around cities attempting to ban this technology. On carbon capture, I think this becomes one of prioritization. Frankly, for me, I don't think that's something we should spend anything more like a very, very small amount of time on, because it gets back to our sphere of influence and control. There are people outside of our organization who are looking at this, right? So statewide, national, the national labs, the federal government, they are looking at this. And so for us, I think it becomes, where can we get the most impact? And I really think, and this is part of what we are looking at internally in terms of our doubling down strategy, policy will be a big deal for all of you. So it's going to be the policy around building codes. It's going to be local ordinances you may have to pass every time a gas water heater stops working. What is it replaced with? That happens every day. Natural gas water heaters are actually replaced in your cities. And that's a local thing that you can actually do to remove natural gas. So it's one of those things. So Javed and George, we need to keep our eye on where emissions are coming from, what are the big pictures. So things like we can support it. We can support carbon capture and sequestration efforts through what Benno was talking about, what Nisa was talking about, by maybe writing letters of support for different initiatives. But other than that, I don't think we should be spending too much time on that. And as far as Bloom Energy offline, we can also provide you a deeper dive on the technology, Javed.
Yeah, I really appreciate the nutshell report on Bloom, because I was always curious about it. And I agree. I mean, there's only so much you can do, or we as a group can do. But I thought if this money is coming in, and that can be a source for us getting some money from this, $1.5 trillion or $3.5 trillion bill, which we would not otherwise get, then this opportunity should not be, you should not just totally ignore it. So if you're able to pull another 10, 20, 30 million or some reasonable number that makes a difference for the purpose of carbon recapture, or then you may want to put a little bit of resources into it. All right, but I'll leave it up to you. So.
No, we'll have a continuing dialogue on this, because frankly, Director Abekoga has talked to me about this, about what's it going to take to build out our clean infrastructure. What's the big picture? How much money do you have to spend where you can literally have EV charging to have 90% of our fleet? So what's it going to take? So it's almost like getting a sense of it. So our staff we're just putting together some very broad numbers here that we'll be sharing with, our member agency working group, which is the staff of all your cities. Also be reaching out to our community advocate group, including Bruce, and then share it with you also as we come into that November, December timeframe, because that's when we expect the PCIA numbers to be solidified, and our net margin, we'll have a lot more confidence in that. So that's where we can really commit to that doubling down, or even more, in terms of resources to get to this carbon reductions.
Yeah, I fully understand what you're saying, but I'm just saying we shouldn't become like a large cruise liner that can't change its course at all. So we should keep some of those options to see if we can
100%.
Get a better bang for our buck with the little resources, especially if this money is available now. Because now, meaning it'll probably take 6 months before the Congress has the money available. So you have a little bit of time to put your focus on it. Thank you, Dr. Krish.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Fligor.
Thank you. And I want to endorse the request, Girish, for practical solutions, working with our member agency and the team to give us as policymakers, local policymakers, things that we can actually do. Los Altos, like many cities, is going through right now updating our cap. And that's actually one of the things I keep talking about. You can have all this flowery, we want things, these are these goals we want to achieve. But I think if there's specific things as policymakers, with the REACH codes, there was the big push, obviously, for all the jurisdictions to adopt the REACH codes. And we got that done. And I know this was talked about, I think, at our last meeting, and one of our attendees had talked about it as well, like what's next. And so I appreciate those practical things that we can actually do as local policymakers to help move this needle. I know I would appreciate those things.
Thank you, directors. Any other comments? Seeing none, thank you very much. Important.
There's a member of the public who wants to speak.
Oh, thank you. Okay. We have Bruce Carney wishing to speak. Please join us, Bruce.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. So I wanted to talk about two things that came up in the last few minutes. And I think I'll start with practical solutions, Director Flygor's question. There are a lot of practical solutions that advocacy community is working on, but it's important to know that practical isn't the same as easy or cheap. Largely, building decarbonization, now that the REACH codes have passed, is going to have to focus on the replacement of natural gas appliances with electrical appliances. And I think Menlo Park locally is out in front of that. They haven't taken the step of basically saying you can't install new gas equipment, but they're trying to screw up their courage to do that. And I wish them every success. So I'd also like to encourage all of you to sort of socialize to your council colleagues the code red nature of the climate emergency, the fact that future practical solutions won't be easy or cheap, and to give them some sense that city budgets are going to have to include ever larger amounts of money for environmental remediation. Adding 30% per year to the environmental budget is my ballpark guess as to what would get us to where we need to be 5 years from now. And the other thing I want to talk about is carbon capture and offsets. So some people have used investments in forests as a way to capture carbon, but our forests are burning. And so it's like burning the money. It's not going to be there anymore. There are biological approaches. So George, the talk that you were referring to is actually one that suggested that species of kelp, which normally grow in the shallow coastal waters, could be grown throughout the deep ocean, and then the kelp could be sunk to the bottom of the ocean where it would not decompose. So it's storing carbon as kelp at the bottom of the deep ocean. Whether that's practical or not, I have no idea. Stanford is one of the leading research institutes for technological carbon capture and storage, whether it's capturing carbon from the smokestack of a natural gas plant or capturing it from ambient air. Sally Benson is a professor there who's doing a lot of the research on that. Some environmentalists say, no, it's got to be natural and biological. Others say, no, you really don't want to take one of your bets off the table when the stakes are so large. And then the last thing I would say is that the carbon curve is not bending yet. It's going up about 2 percentage points a year. We're at 414. We'll probably get to 500 before it peaks. The world 500 parts per million carbon is a world that you don't want to live in, and you don't want your children living in either.
Thank you, Bruce. Always helpful in your helping us focus on various, very significant realities. Thank you. Any other comments on this item? And I do not see any from the, yes, director.
Yeah. So the feedback I'm looking for is the strategic focus areas. I'm thinking I will expand it from the 5, maybe add another one on program expansion and implementation. And so it may become 6, and provide that to the board as part of the budget item so that the board can adopt that. So those would kind of set the priorities for the year. And frankly, the 20 goals and 70 measures feels more work planning to me. But I would like to get the board's blessing on the strategic focus areas. So if you're okay with that, I'll fold it into the budget presentation for next month, September 8th. And the work plan itself will come to you at the October meeting. And so I'm seeing some head nods here, Chair Gibbons. So
yes, I'm just looking at some wording that we may talk about as we've discussed earlier. Your review is coming up, and that has a direct tie into the strategic plan and your goals. And I would offer for the executive committee that there might be some word tweaking. I think the program expansion addresses some of the comments that came out of the review, and we just might tweak some of the language. So if you see something on at the September 9th board meeting, it's to this point, but perhaps a little bit refined.
Good. Thank you very much. I'll move forward with that support and direction.
Okay. Thank you. Any other comments? Seeing none, we will now move to back on my calendar here, wherever it went. There it is. Yes, sorry. Yeah. The fourth item on our regular calendar is also a discussion item. It's equity framework update. And Melissa.
Thank you, Chair. As Gurish said, equity continues to be a focus for us. It was a focus area for this year's strategic plan. And so I'm going to just talk about the implementation and where we are right now. Next slide, please. So when we talk about equity, we do have a comprehensive framework. It's what we call the DEI, or Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Framework. And for us, it's a vision for addressing equity across our organization. And so the purpose of the strategy is to provide opportunities, increase access, and promote fairness across our agency's internal and external activities. And in June, Amy presented on the programs piece of the DEI framework, which is about integrating equity into SVCE's programs offerings. And today I'm going to present on both supplier diversity and staffing, and I'll take them in turn. Next slide, please. So for supplier diversity, our framework goal is to establish a set of procedures that encourage more contracting with diverse, small, and/or local businesses. And the mission of this framework is to foster a diverse and locally focused supply chain that serves SVCE's communities and supports SVCE's short and long-term environmental and decarbonization goals. And one thing I do want to note here, in the June executive committee meeting, Director Flagger, you did mention when it comes to the supplier diversity equity framework, we should consult legal counsel on this. So we have engaged our outside counsel in terms of developing this framework. I've had them look at this mission statement to make sure that we're in compliance with the various statutory requirements when it comes to supplier diversity. Next slide, please. So in terms of the elements, it is part of this larger DEI framework. There are two components to it. So there's the mission statement, and then there is also an action plan. Next slide. So the mission statement, which we just saw, basically for us, it's what does success look like within this framework, within this action, what do we want to see? And then the action plan will be a set of procedures that are integrated into our operational procurement activities to ensure that we expand our diverse suppliers and that we comply with the various statutory requirements. Next slide. So in terms of timing, we've basically spent the spring and summer outlining the framework content, developing the mission statement, and identifying core community engagement strategies, as well as doing some preliminary outreach with other CCAs and other agencies. Starting this fall, we're going to begin to draft framework content, continue our outreach in terms of hosting discussions with CCAs, CBOs, and other organizations. And then late fall will be about, end stage framework development and review. And then this winter, we do plan to present the framework to the board for review. Next slide. So the equity framework for internal staffing. So internal staffing, our goal is to establish a set of procedures that encourage recruitment, hiring, and retention of diverse staff within SVCE. Our mission is to foster and sustain an inclusive environment and internal culture where diversity drives innovation and solutions that meets the needs of our customers. Next slide. So similar, I'm not going to go, this slide is very similar to the last slide. Basically, there are two components. There's a mission statement and an action plan. And the next slide basically explains that the mission statement, again, is what the success looks like. The action plan is, again, a set of procedures that are integrated into our recruitment and retention activities to ensure that we have a diverse staff and inclusive culture. And finally, next slide. The timeline is very similar to the timeline for supplier diversity. We are working on them in parallel. So again, we spent the past few months on early engagements with other organizations and framework content. We're going to spend the fall drafting the content, going through final review, and again, this winter, we'll present the framework for board review. And that's it. I will stop there and see if there are any questions, comments.
Any questions from any directors? I see none. Thank you. Well said, and I think it's a very strong priority of the board, consistently expressed about the equity. So, and I appreciate the customer and internal and all the procedures there. So thank you very much for keeping us up to date and the work expressed in that summary. Okay, and as far as I can tell from the agenda, that is the last official item on the regular calendar, but this is an opportunity for members of the executive committee to offer any updates, thoughts, concerns, questions. And Director Abikoga.
Thank you. I just wanted to put a shout out to Don Bray. I participated in yesterday's Silicon Valley Business Journal, I think it was called Climate Change in Business webinar. And Don was one of the panelists and he did a fantastic job, represented SVCE very well. So I just wanted to say thanks to Don.
Agree, thank you. If there are no other comments, thank you all very much. Thank you, staff. And as always, have a great weekend and we will catch up with you Monday.